They were furious. I mean, we had legal action coming out of our ears all the time. But what could they do? We're not saying we like it, we're just saying it's half the price.
Hey there, James here, and you're listening to the Own the Moment podcast, the show where we explore the complex and always evolving landscape of marketing, advertising, and branding, and try to get to the bottom of what it means to be a truly memorable brand. The Own the Moment podcast is brought to you by Como Technologies, a self-service, complete customer engagement platform that helps you cut through the noise to truly connect with your customers and retain and grow those connections over time. With Como, you can build and deploy new campaigns, activations, promotions, and programs in days, not months, and our software is used by some of the world's biggest consumer brands, from Heineken to Budget, Goodman Fielder, Foxtel, JLL, Williams Racing, and McDonald's. Learn more at como.tech. Today's guest is Jamie Peate, the Global Head of Retail Strategy and Effectiveness at McCann, Manchester. When Jamie and his team first won the Aldi account in the UK almost 20 years ago, the perception was that Aldi was, in his words, cheap stuff for people with no money. In other words, the perception of the brand was pretty terrible. Jamie told stories of mothers in focus groups saying their kids wouldn't be seen at school with an Aldi brand snack. Starting from a very low base of under 2% market share in the UK, Jamie and his team have successfully built out the Aldi brand over the last 2 decades to the point where they've now displaced a competitor in the big 4 supermarkets in the UK by market share. They're loved by a huge base of loyal customers and are consistently winning awards for their memorable advertising work. A truly remarkable feat and a testament to consistent brand and marketing work over a sustained period of time. Jamie and I spent over an hour digging into the Aldi story, the strategy and insights that went into their perfect brand positioning, how their most famous campaign, Like Brands But Cheaper, was born, and just how a carrot called Kevin became their lovable and extremely successful brand mascot. This conversation is filled to the brim with interesting stories and, more importantly, insightful takeaways for creatives, marketers, advertisers, and brands. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get to the show. Welcome to the show, Jamie Peate.
Thank you. Very, very pleased to be here, James.
Great. Jamie, I wanted to have you on today to discuss your work with obviously building out the supermarket giant Aldi's brand.
Sure.
And in particular, the power of perfect positioning. And I wanted to start with a quote from the great Mark Ritson, which I think really summarizes what Aldi does so well. So I'll just read through the quote. Mark says, Aldi's positioning around high quality products at lowest possible prices and with a no-nonsense approach has been executed incredibly well. It would be easy to walk into an Aldi store and criticize its drab decor and bland, price-based visual merchandising as being poor marketing. But these criticisms mistake the nature of positioning. Aldi's store environment is just as successful as Chanel's in communicating to consumers what the store is all about. So Jamie, we're going to dig into the positioning and all of the wonderful brand and advertising work you've done over the years with Aldi. But tell me, when did you start working with Aldi and what was the Aldi brand like at that time?
Sure. So McCann, Manchester, where I'm based in Manchester, but I have a kind of global role. But the first business really came into Manchester. And we've been working them. I think it's 18 years. It's getting on for 19 years to start with. And what's interesting is, the old adage of, from small acorns, great oaks grow, is absolutely true of Aldi. So they came to the UK in the late 80s. Initially, the first store was opened in a place called Sketchford in Birmingham, and they were a pretty small operation when they came over. And they, for the first few years, it's fair to say they weren't that successful. They came over. They were seen as a bit of a novelty in the UK. We'd had, I suppose, what you would call limited range discounters in the UK before, but they tended to sell branded products. So the most famous one being QuickSave, who are no longer with us anymore, but they were a very successful company for a long time. Had a great line, which was top brands at rock bottom prices. The guy who set them up literally bought old, sort of, old cinemas and stuff. But the
Wow.
thing was, the stores were, fairly basic, basic shelving, limited range, but they were the brands that you knew. So you went in and it was Kellogg's cornflakes, it was Coca-Cola, it was Heinz, etc., etc. So I suppose the shtick was, all right, you're not paying for the store, you're not paying for the thing, but you're getting the brands that you like. Aldi was somewhat different because it came to the UK with predominantly their own Aldi brands, which were pretty much unknown. And also, they opened in the UK with a fairly limited range, and they opened in what would be probably, if we were trying to be really kind way to describe it is, cheaper property areas of towns. So
Right.
in areas where property prices were lower. Well, so what you really get is, if you're not careful, you get the idea that it's basically a store with cheap products for people with no money. And this was their issue really when they came to UK. It's worth just thinking about where they came from. So
Mm.
Aldi stands for Albrecht Discount. The Albrecht family started the business. I think it was in Essen in Germany. It's certainly after the First World War, and it was a time, obviously, of austerity in Germany. And they really came in to answer this thing, and they basically had limited range, and the ethos was we only stock things that sell. If they don't sell, we turn the they don't list them anymore, etc.
Mm.
Very very much about a pared down, keep all of operational costs low. But it was really the two brothers, so the sons of the Albrecht family, Theo and Karl, who grew the business. And certainly after the Second World War,
Mm.
again, Germany was hugely in a time of austerity. They really pioneered that business, and it grew and grew and grew and grew in Germany to be the number one retailer. Carl and Theo fell out in the 60s.
Mm.
The sort of mythology is that it was over selling cigarettes in the stores, but I think also they just didn't like each other, and they literally split the business in two.
Wow.
So they literally drew a line across the middle of Germany and said, "You can have the North, Theo, and I, Carl, will have the South." And to this day, Aldi is actually two companies:
Oh
Aldi
wow.
Sud and Aldi Nord. So the UK and Australia would be Aldi Sud.
Hmm.
Places like Aldi, obviously Germany, you have both. France, Spain, they're all Aldi Nord. And then a bit weird in America, you've got Aldi Sud and you've got Trader Joe's in America, which is actually owned by Aldi Nord.
Ah,
So,
right.
but they were very much two divert. They were like competitors, really.
Mm.
And what that meant was that in Germany, for many, many years, they didn't advertise on TV because they were separate companies.
Hmm.
So the thing that drove the business was what we call the leaflet. So every week there is a leaflet that produces that shows what they call their special buys, which is the sort of rotating range of products which tend to sit in the middle of the store. Anybody's familiar with Lidl? Lidl have a very similar, obviously owned by Schwartz. They have a similar sort of business model. So that was the backbone and still is to some way the backbone of their business. So anyway, I digress. So when they first came to us about 18, 19 years ago, actually it was to do recruitment advertising. So it was
Wow.
literally to recruit staff for their stores and then into their sort of management programs. And we
Hmm.
still do recruitment for them. So that was the start of the relationship. But then what really got things going was we had the opportunity and now do run their weekly leaflet. So that is a huge operation. It's
Hmm.
produced every single week. It is distributed through their stores, and then it's distributed electronically to a whole range of customers as
Hmm.
well. And that was the start of the relationship with Aldi. And from that, the relationship grew and eventually moved into what we think about more, traditional advertising as we see now. So it very much was a very small, a small acorn to start with. Um, and then I think to what I was saying about where they came from. So they came to the UK. They came with this very different sort of model with their own Aldi brands, a very very limited range of SKUs. I mean, even today, where they've increased their range, a typical Aldi would only have 2,000 SKUs. A Tesco would have 35,000 plus, depends on the size of the
Wow.
store, maybe more. Um, and so it was definitely received with a little bit of curiosity, but what I say is sort of mixed reception in the UK.
Hmm.
Um, I think the fact that they put themselves into, as I say, cheaper property areas didn't really help, and it got quite a sort of snooty response from both the other supermarkets and also from the media. So we had things like the then MD of Tesco saying things like CEO of Tesco saying, Aldi can live in their bit of the market, we'll live in our bit of market, it's fine. And you had people like the Times saying things like, one searches for kiwi fruit and avocados in vain in Aldi. So I think
Interesting.
the issue that they presented themselves with was they became very quickly, as I say, this place for this supermarket with cheap products for people with no money, and actually that then created a pretty negative
Hmm.
feeling around the brand. So I always think it's summed up by the fact that it became a bit of a playground insult at school. So your mum shops
Hmm.
at Aldi was pretty bad, and
Right.
we anecdotally in focus groups and so on got things like kids mums saying they kids will not take Aldi products to school, or they will not use an Aldi shopping bag, or if I
Hmm.
go shopping in Aldi I'll take a Marks and Spencer's bag or something. So that's pretty bad for a brand. And we'd originally started to sort of tackle this head on, and the initial work that we did for them was, I think, trying to take on this idea of quality. Really,
Hmm.
that very much as you say it, and to the Ritson quote, Aldi's whole business is built on the idea of selling, the best quality product for the money you pay. So you're not paying for the store, you're not
Hmm.
paying for the signs, you're not paying for lots of staff in the store. It's a pretty lean operation. It's
Hmm.
run very efficiently. You're not paying for a cafe, you're not paying for all those kind of things. So if you like, a higher proportion of what you spend goes on the product.
Hmm.
So what we were finding was people just didn't believe it.
Hmm.
It's like the old adage, you get what you pay for, don't you?
Right.
You can't, as my mum would always say to you, well, you get what you pay for.
Hmm.
You can't have your cake and eat it.
Hmm.
So people couldn't believe that things like olive oil and Parmesan cheese and so forth was so cheap.
Hmm.
So the initial work we did with them really was twofold. First of all, if I'm really honest, we sort of copied Marks and Spencers. So if you remember the very famous Marks and Spencers ads with Dervla Kerwin, the actress doing the voiceovers, food porn, as they were called at the
Hmm.
time, which was, beautiful shots of, chicken, olive oil, wine,
Hmm.
puddings, so forth, with this lovely seductive voice. Well, so we did a bit of that, which was quite successful, and of course, obviously at great price points. And then we also did. It was a time of celebrity chefs. So
Right.
we had, obviously, you'd had Delia Smith doing all her work with Sainsbury's. Then they signed Jamie Oliver, hugely successful. I always remember we actually approached James Martin, if you know James Martin,
No. No.
Yorkshire chef, quite famous for puddings and desserts. He
Hmm.
wanted too much money at the time, so we actually ended up with well, what's I can't think of his name. He's married to Fern Britton, who used to present Ready Steady Cook. His name will come to me. Can't remember his name now, but he basically was our celebrity chef. Anyway, so business was doing quite well,
Hmm.
and then what happened was. At we went into the financial crash of sort of 2008, and they'd been making some headway, and then their rate of growth just started to slow again. And you'd think this is a bit weird because surely at a time of financial growth you would think Aldi was at top of mind,
Right.
but it wasn't. And this was very concerning. I mean, even then, towards 2010, they only still after all these years, they've been in the UK since '88 or something. they still only had less than 2% of the UK market. I mean, the UK market is a big market. It's worth
Mm.
what, probably then 150 billion or something. So still, I mean, it's not
Mm.
small, but it's a small player. Lidl were bigger than them. Lidl had about the same number of stores. They were at about 2% still of the market. So you still had
Mm.
the big four, as we call them, Tesco, Sainsbury, Morrison's, Asda, with getting on for 70% of the market.
Mm.
So this was an issue, and they were even really questioning whether the UK was long term was going to be a viable option for them. So I think in these times you have to do a bit of sort of digging, don't you? You need to start to think about, well, how do we find something more interesting to talk about with Aldi, and fundamentally, how can we find something that would make them famous?
Right.
And we have a process in McCann called Truth to Meaning. We examine all aspects and we sort of dig into it. And we found something quite interesting, which went again straight back to the two brothers. So Carl, who ran Aldi Sud, he ran this. He had this quote which we found, which basically said, "We don't ask how much we can charge, how much we can sell a product for. We only ask how little we can charge for it." So
Hmm.
we thought, well, that's really interesting, isn't it? It's like it's not, that's pretty counterintuitive for a
Right.
retailer because you normally think, what's the highest thing we can, what can we get away with selling this thing for?
Mm.
They're saying the opposite. They're saying we want to try and sell it for the lowest price that we can, so
Mm.
that and we like this. And from that, we developed this what we called a meaningful role for them, which was this idea that access to high quality fresh food should be a right, not a privilege. It should be
Mm.
something for everybody. It should be something that is democratized to everybody. And we also from this we thought, well, we like this idea. This is interesting. It gives us a kind of point of view, and it's kind of pointy and a bit sort of like
Mm.
cage rattling. Um, and so from that, we thought, well, also, does that give us permission then, if we're on this campaigning thing? One of the things that really struck us was that supermarket advertising is boring, really. It's quite serious. It's quite. There are some exceptions. You can think of the sort of the Dudley Moore stuff that was done with Tesco and so forth. But in general, it's not that entertaining.
Mm.
Bit serious, bit shouty.
It's all
We
quite
thought,
the same, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, it's very price and quality, price
mm.
range and quality. What else is there to say, really?
Right.
Um, so we thought, well, maybe what we should do is find a way of being a bit more like the pirates, be the pirates, not the navy, if you like, and have
Right.
a tone of voice that was a bit more sort of piratical, for want of a better phrase.
Hmm.
And so we had this thought, and then when we looked really into what was happening and why the rate of sale was slowing so much, what we found was that and these things are all everything's always so logical in retrospect. And in fact, I was at a meeting yesterday with ITV in the UK, big independent, and they were presenting some recent research which was very similar to
Hmm.
things that we saw in 2008, which basically said, in times of financial stress, you can't afford to buy the wrong things.
Hmm.
So if you're somebody who's got a very limited range of amount of money in your pocket or your purse, you've only got this money to feed the family this week. If you buy stuff and the family don't like it, that's a
Hmm.
big problem because I haven't got any more money. I can't. So what do we do? Do we go without for the rest of the week? So
Right.
what was happening was people were saying, well, yeah, Aldi's cheap, but there's all these brands, all these Aldi brands. I've never heard of them. Are they any good? Don't know. I might have tried one or two things and thought, well, that was all right. My mum told me that she liked the jam.
Hmm.
But I don't know. Whereas, if you know where you are with a brand, you know where you are with Heinz, you know where you are with Kellogg's, you know where you are with Coca-Cola, you know where you are with Nivea or whatever.
Hmm.
And what was interesting was it made us think about the whole thing in a bit of a different way, because I think prior to that we'd really thought, you know, to try and justify ourselves all the time, to say we're as good as brands. You don't need brands. You can buy the Aldi brands. It's fine. Of
Hmm.
course, people don't want to, start with where the customer is. Put yourself in, have empathy. Because
Mm.
what they're saying is actually customers like brands. We
Yep.
like brands. So we thought, well, and then we were talking to Aldi and they said, when we develop our brands, we spec them against the leading one. So if you buy a Heinz tomato, Aldi's Branwell tomato sauce, we
Mm.
spec that product against Heinz.
Hmm.
And actually, it's, if we did consumer tests, it
Mm.
might not be 100% the same. It might be 90%, but it's half the price. And
Right.
we said, well, gosh, that's really interesting as well. What if we got away from this shouty thing? And what if we just said, you like brands, we like brands as well. Actually, we like brands. We like Heinz tomato sauce, and we also like the Aldi one, but the half price. One time, you choose. So it's up to you. You're entitled to buy whatever you like. If you like the Heinz one, that's fine. We like the Heinz one. We also like the Aldi one, which is half the price, and actually 90% of customers, because we've tested it and legally we have to put this on the ad, say to us they like it too. Then it's up to you. So, like brands but cheaper
Mm.
was born from that idea, and in the spirit of this kind of like being the pirates, not the navy, we started to make these little films.
Mm.
We shot the original one with the daughter of one of the creatives, and we describe they've been described as all sorts of things. I think of them as like little like 100 little play or 1,000 little plays about Britain, because you
Right.
always know somebody who's got something to say, always got somebody who's your grandma, your auntie, whatever. One of the creatives, Neil and Dave, the creative directors who came with them. Neil used to call them like hostage videos because they were literally done. I mean, they were so cheap to make. They were mainly street
Mm.
cast. We would shoot them and shoot lots of versions, and they'd be sort of semi-scripted. So we'd see what we got from it. So we did them. So we made the first one, which was tomato sauce, with a little girl who said she liked this one, she liked this one, but she didn't like boys. Was the original one. Then we made one for baked beans against Heinz baked beans, which these two little girls saying like that, but they both make you Trump was the two things they said. And then we shot one with a lady called Jean
Mm.
from the northeast, who said her husband liked tea, he liked PG tips, he also liked the Aldi one, but she didn't like tea, she didn't like gin. She liked gin. And I can remember it quite vividly. So we made this one, we showed it to Aldi, and they're like, "Oh, I'm really not sure." But,
What were they not sure about? Was it
I think they just thought it was moving away from the product, and
right?
I'm always a big belief that I always say to new recruits and people coming to the industry, we're in the light entertainment business. Our business is to entertain, to make you famous and to be entertaining. That's
Hmm.
why you pay attention. All the work of Orlando Ward, all the work of Ian McGilchrist, etc., etc. And so, little bits of entertainment, and that's why, because we're intruding into people's lives and all the rest of it. So I think they just thought it was a little bit too, what did gin have to do with what they're talking about? Anyway, we
Hmm.
were doing some groups on something else, and in the last 10 minutes, I said, "Oh, we've got this ad. It's not been on yet. Do you want to have a look at it?" Put it on. And of course, everybody in the group laughed and said, "Oh, that's
Mm.
really funny." And we showed it, and the rest is history. It just took off. I mean, it was
Mm.
literally the third one we made. We made more than 100 like brands ads.
Wow.
We're still making them now. We've got two going on air fairly soon on a whole. But that's what really it. I mean, she became a national treasure. It was
Mm.
voted the ITV Ad of the Year by ITV viewers. It was voted Ad of the Decade for
Mm.
2010 to 20 by Marketing Week readers. It won a gold IPA award. It's gone on to win, Light Brands campaign has won a global grand FE Best of the Best. It's won Creative Arrow Awards. It's won across the board.
Mm.
Um, and then it spurred Aldi on to do, we did them for mayonnaise, we did them for chocolate, we did them for wine, we did them for hot cross buns, we did them
Mm.
for washing powder. So we literally did everything. And I always describe it as marketing jujitsu, because we don't sell brands, not really. You have a few brands sometimes on sponsor. So we threw it back at the other supermarkets. We were using the weight of the weight of the brand and the weight of the supermarket against them. They were furious. I mean, we had legal action coming out of our ears all the
Wow.
time. But what could they do? Because we tested them. So we'd say on
Mm.
screen, 80% of customers who like PG tips also say they like the Aldi one.
Mm.
And then we're not saying we like it, we're just saying it's half the price. Ads were 20-second. It's interesting because it brings, the whole, I think it brings the whole performance marketing versus brand marketing, debate. It flips that because they were
Right.
hugely brand building.
Mm.
But their performance ads, the price of a 20-second ad, the price is on screen for 15 seconds of
Right.
those ads. So they are building a brand. It's the
It's
famous,
genius.
the great quote of the great Jeremy Bullmore, sadly no longer with us, died last year, I think, or the start of this year.
Mm.
A great ad will sell now and forever. It's doing both jobs for you. Also,
Right.
what I like about it, in this time of purpose, and
Mm.
and Bolton, Aldi does have a real purpose. It really tries to get you to get good food for less, or to have more food, more for your money. That to me is proper purpose. It's the brand. It's a truth of the brand.
Right, and in a time, yeah, just in a time where purpose is sort of I mean every brand is scrambling to add purpose, and I think mostly with good intentions. I think there's something very authentic about Audi's purpose,
Yeah,
um, uh, and just to close the loop on like brands but cheaper. I mean, and so where is the market share today? After all of this success over the last decade, where I read somewhere maybe it's now in the big four.
it
Aldi
is.
counts
Well,
as one of the
they
big
are.
four.
They are indeed. So they overtook. Well, we were bigger than Morrison's in volume terms. We have been for a while. But obviously, being a discounter, the
Mm,
value share is lower because we charge less. We overtook Morrison's towards the end of last year.
mm,
Actually, think September or October time. We thought we might. They might slip ahead of us at Christmas. We can talk a bit about Christmas. Christmas
would
traditionally was a
love
bit
to.
of a tricky time. However, we've addressed the true Christmas problem. Um, but in fact, we didn't, and we are securely now ahead of Morrison. So the share is at around 10% now.
It's
So we
incredible.
added on eight. So they've gone from possibly less than a £2 billion business to a north of a £16 billion business
It's
in the
crazy, isn't
UK,
it?
which is huge. They are and growing. I mean,
Mm,
they're
right.
again. There are so many good examples. They during time of COVID, Aldi had a rough time
Mm,
because they were the wrong shape. They didn't have e-coms.
right.
They are fairly small stores that have limited range. So
Mm,
are you going to get everything? Are they going to have everything?
mm,
You're fairly close to people in an Aldi, they're not big stores.
yep.
So and they're not convenient really. They're slightly out of town usually. So
Mm,
all the things that we wanted during COVID, they didn't
mm,
have. But what they made the very brave decision in my is to not go dark. They advertised, they kept
mm,
going, and guess what? Now we're in a time of financial challenge when people are looking to save money, and saving money on your grocery bill is a big saving for the year. Aldi is the discounter of choice, and I mean,
mm,
I think last year they added nearly 1.5 points of share onto their market share, which is huge.
mm.
So
It's
so so it's a big success story,
mm,
really. And like brands is still going strong. So
yeah,
we
and
still.
sorry to interrupt there,
No, not
Jamie.
at all.
Just to come back to like brands only cheaper. So I'm sure you've read Lemon by Orlando Wood and the System One team.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just sort of obsessed with the book at the moment. I think as someone that's, I mean, I'm not in advertising, but sort of immersing myself in this world with this podcast. I think for me, like brands only cheaper, it feels like almost the textbook example of the right brain advertising. From the quirky sense of humor to the regional accents to the real life. Tell me, sort of, what's your take on Orlando's thesis around left versus right brand advertising and the
I
decline over the last.
I know Orlando quite well. I'm a huge fan of his work, and also of Ian McGilchrist's work. You know, the
Right.
neuroscientist that this is based a lot of Orlando's sort of taken his work and put it into a cultural context. And I don't know if his new book Lookout is also really well.
Yeah, I must read that one. It's on
Really
my
good as
list.
well, but very much building on the same thing. Well, I'm a huge fan. I absolutely buy into this idea of basically the left and right sides of the brain. They do the same things, but they do the same things in a different way. They attend to the world in a different way. The right brain is much more about a broad beam. It's more about the real world. I love there's a great quote that Orlando talks about. He says it's looking for things that are just off stage. So basically, it's looking for things that you're not looking for. This is how brands grow. Byron Sharp, you grow by bringing more customers into your thing. You know, the left hand side of the brain, it's much more narrow. Uh, it's much more manipulative. It's about people who are already in the market. So if you're going to appeal to the right hand side of the brain and that broad beam attention, exactly what you say, being entertaining, being humorous, being based on real people, being in real situations, possibly being slightly nostalgic is very good as well. Being having a sense of place and a sense of time, having a sense of a story, all of these things. I think what's happened, James, is that these are all things that people who worked in the advertising industry and great advertising creatives knew. Sorry, my dog's in the room with me. I just was looking. She's okay.
Speaking of real life.
Speaking of real life, she's looking at me now. Um, uh, these are all things that great advertising creatives knew instinctively. They knew, you know, the David Abbotts, the Bill Burnbacks, the John Hegartys, all these people. They knew these things. And I think great marketeers did too. When we look back to the great work of the past, all the great work that was done, you know, about the great works of Heineken, Cadbury's, P&G as well, Unilever over the years. I think what happened was with the rise of digital tech, and you know we live in a digital world. I mean, we shouldn't really talk about digital advertising
Right.
or digital. It isn't a separate thing. It's the world we live in. We live in a digital enabled world. That's where we live. It's how we consume things. So that's fine, of course. And of course, it's been hugely beneficial in lots of ways. I think one of the issues is that what happened was the growth of digital marketing really came from direct marketing. So it enabled and it sort of was a renaissance of and a new enabler to direct marketing. And direct marketing, which is probably the first sort of marketing, the first sort of advertising. You know, go out back to Claude Hopkins and all the rest of it. Is based really on the ADA model, isn't it? It's based on that very linear model. You know, attention, interest, desire, action, and it's very linear and it's very selling. Now, the point is that is only one model of advertising. Nobody in the whole world really knows how advertising works. Not one person can tell you, I don't think, whether an ad is going to work or not work. And that's why people like System One are very useful, because what they do is they up the probability. We're all in the gambling game, really. We're all in the game of trying to place bets where we think it's going to work. The seduction of the ADA model is it appeals very strongly to clients because it's very logical and it's very selling, isn't it? It focuses
Right.
on selling you stuff. And you know it's very much about benefits and messages. However, that's not really the only way advertising works. And if you think about other things, you know, the idea of entertainment, the idea of showmanship, the idea of seduction in some way, or maybe the idea of advertising is you know PR stunts, all this kind of stuff. That's ignored. What digital did was it really enabled that first thing, and we got into this whole world of personalization and addressability of everything, and also the idea of measurement. So
Right.
the problem with old advertising was, it's back to the famous quote, you know, 50% of advertising is Wanamaker, isn't it? 50% of advertising is wasted, I just don't know what 50% it is. And So suddenly it seems really seductive, doesn't it,
Mm.
to go into this world where I'm addressing people directly and I'm also being able to measure it. The problem is first, well, there are many problems. First problem is, at a very basic, are you really addressing these people? So there's all the
Mm.
issues around quality of data, about ad fraud, about
Mm.
all this kind of thing. Secondly, it doesn't it doesn't create reach to people who are not in the market now. So it's
Right.
very hard to build brands because brands really, I might not be in the market for something and you are,
Mm.
but if you're buying something, if I've got for it to mean something to all of us, I've got to have an opinion on it. I don't own a Bentley, sadly, but I've got a pretty good opinion about what Bentley is.
Mm.
I've got a thought in my mind of what Bentley is and who Bentley, what I might feel like if I owned a Bentley. If you're only ever directing your comms to those people,
Mm.
that's a huge. Obviously, it's more brands aren't just about comms; they're about all sorts of things.
Sure.
But that's a problem as well. And then I think it's led to very, very the growth of what now is called performance marketing.
Mm.
So there's stuff that is activational, it's very short term, it's about people who are in the market now, it's response driven, back to the direct marketing,
Right.
and it is it's measurable. So you can quote all these figures. I've done this. I've got this back. If you know what I mean. But more importantly, it's done very. Whoever came up with the term performance marketing, I don't know where it came from,
Mm.
was a genius because what it's done is depositioned all other types of marketing. Do you want
Right.
marketing that don't perform? Then is the other part of marketing not performing? This is
Right.
performance marketing. And if you then call the other part of marketing brand building, which is it often called,
Mm.
sounds a bit woolly, that doesn't it? Are we going to
Yeah.
stick? Where should we stick our 2 million quid? Should we stick it into performance marketing where we're getting this return, or should we stick it in brand building? Oh, what's that?
Mm.
And this is a problem. So, and then if you add on to that the fact that advertising is a craftsman's job. It's not a
Mm.
profession. You don't have to pass exams to be. If I was a doctor
Right.
or a lawyer or or an architect or something, I'd
Mm.
have to pass exams and then have to be recognised by a professional body. It doesn't
Mm.
really exist in advertising. So,
Mm.
so what that means is you've got all sorts of people in there, and there's no sort of precedent. So we don't build on the knowledge of the past. So, if you're a lawyer, you learn law, don't you? You go right
Mm.
back to the Greeks and the Romans and you come right
Mm.
through. This doesn't happen. So I think there's been a generation of marketeers and advertisers who have not grown up in with in the old school of people who instinctively knew this and don't really know it. And then
Mm.
also you've got on top of that, you've got the fact that it seems very seductive to do a lot of this new marketing because it's cheaper, isn't it, to do all this stuff? You don't have to make
Right.
TV films, and so this has become a real problem. I think we're waking up from it a bit
Mm.
now. I think also the growth of big holding agency companies, big holding groups, WPP and so forth,
Mm.
has meant there's been pressure on margins, and of course that affects headcounts. So in the
Mm.
old days, because we are a bit of a craft, you'd have people you'd have almost like apprentices in your, people would
Mm.
listen and learn. Now that's not so easy. So
Mm.
I think what's happened is I think it's led to this false um, split of performance versus brand building. Whereas what we should really think about is it's a whole thing,
Right.
and everything does a bit of both. I mean, and we can talk a bit about this. We can talk if we talk about Kevin
Mm.
in shortly. We can see that you can actually build brands, or you can don't think about it as building brand. Think about that of securing future sales. You're giving yourself a
Mm.
better chance of selling stuff in the future while also attending to sales now. And of course that's very important to retail, isn't it? There's the old adage in retail is, if you don't build your retail brand, you haven't got future sales. If you don't have a
Mm.
short-term strategy, you haven't got a retail business. You've got to sell
Right.
stuff. What do retailers do? What did I sell on this day last year? What's my like for like sales? All this kind of stuff. So that is a very important thing. And just to finish off on like brand strategy could do that. You could you
Mm.
could sell stuff now. You could sell packs of tea for half the price of the leading brand, and you could build a positive emotional resonance of your brand, strong memory, strong positive emotional memory and resonance, which ups the chances that people will come to you in the future, and more people will come to you in the future.
Yeah, I want to get on to Kevin in a moment, but just a final question on this sort of left versus right brain. So, I mean, obviously, performance marketing. I mean, it does make sense for a very specific type of business, right? If you're a t-shirt e-commerce shop or whatever, I mean, of course, it makes sense to to not be running TV ads, but to be doing very clever lookalike audiences on Facebook and all that. Have you seen that that more performance side of marketing seep into big consumer brands as well? I mean, do you have clients over the last decade that have equally wanted to explore the performance side? Because that's intriguing to me.
For sure. Oh,
If that's the case.
for sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know, but I think what's interesting is you're absolutely right, of course. But I think what happens is that you get a startup, let's say, t-shirt, clever t-shirts, whatever, and they do all that stuff, and then you reach a limit. You
Mm,
reach a glass ceiling. And if
right.
you are going to go beyond that, you have to start to reach people who are not necessarily in the market now. Look at Airbnb. Look at
Mm,
all of the compare the market, the aggregators. Look at
mm,
people like Booking.com or whatever. They're all on TV now.
yeah.
They're all
Yeah.
there because they have to get more people to their websites. So I think
Mm,
what's I mean, obviously, Les Binet and Peter Field talk about this a lot, and they talk about 60-40 or whatever it
mm,
is, however you carve it up. And they talk about, brands that actually are a bit more sort of performance led actually should be investing a bit more in brand. They should be actually thinking
mm,
about widening their thing. What I think it's led us to is the way I think about it now is we talk to clients about full funnel fame. So the funnel, there's a great. I would love to have this quote, but it's not. I didn't. It's from. It's the guy who at Tom, who's at Jellyfish. He talks about the funnel being the cockroach of marketing concepts. In other words, it's been around for ages and it never goes away. It could be a nuclear war, and like the cockroach, the funnel would still be there because it's the ADA model, of course,
mm,
but I think what I do like is if you think about it not in such a rigid way, but you think about full funnel fame. So
mm.
you're always trying to sell and you're always trying to build a brand.
That's
The
interesting.
emphasis might change a bit depending on where you are. You might nudge a bit more that way or a bit that way. That's not a bad way to think about it. And so that's the kind of conversations we have with
Yeah.
our clients that think about it. And of course, we'll get on to this because Kevin is very relevant to it, but not just Kevin. Back to Orlando, I think he came up with the idea of a fluent device, or certainly he
Mm,
coined that phrase. Something that comes to mind, like being fluent in a language, you just don't think about it, easily comes to mind. Fluent devices, be they characters, be they words, be they scenarios, are great things that you can deploy across the funnel and you can deploy into your say more performance end of
mm.
activity, which will aid and up the performance, but it will also build a brand as well, and
That's
that's
really
very
clever.
powerful because,
Yeah,
and of course
that's
they're
clever.
very adaptable across touch points and so forth.
Yeah, that's clever. So let's move on to Kevin. So, Kevin the Carrot, maybe give a quick, I mean, for those outside the UK, a quick background. Who is Kevin?
Sure.
Where did it come from, and what's so powerful about it?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Kevin the Carrot. So we'd had a lot of success with Aldi. We talked about light brands. I'll briefly mention, I won't go to. We then ran a sort of parallel campaign with light brands called Swap and Save. Very
Mm,
straightforward. Swap to Aldi from your current supermarket and save money. The
mm,
thing we did was actually was born in Ireland, in the
mm,
Republic of Ireland. What's interesting was we took quite aspirational families, so they weren't so aspirational that you thought, but they thought, well, if they're shopping at Aldi, it must be okay.
right.
And the combo of that and like brands together, that was the dream combo. And I think at one stage Aldi was growing by 40% a year, which is
Mm.
it's big.
For a big,
Uh,
consumer
for a
brand. Yeah.
big, yeah, grocery retailer, yeah, and all of the complexity that comes with making sure
Mm,
there's fruit on the shelves and all the rest of it. Um, but despite all this success, we still had a big problem at Christmas. And the problem again, this is the other thing. We don't spend enough time these days understanding problems. And this is Ritson. Ritson calls it orientation, call it diagnosis, marketing. Do you really understand what it is you're trying to do, and therefore where comms can or can't play a role? Because lots of things comms can't fix.
Right.
Comms is a weak force. Things like range, pricing, experience, all these things, they're much more important than the product. Is it any good? All this kind of stuff. Yet we rush to comms tactics to try and solve all sorts of problems. And I think again, it's about having a whole generation of marketeers who probably haven't grown up in the old school of sort of brand management, where they saw things much more holistically. But so yeah, so the problem was very straightforward. As we got towards Christmas every year, Aldi lost market share,
Huh.
and you could see it. You could look if you looked at weekly Nielsen or Kantar, you just see the share drop as you got towards the big day. And when we dug into this a lot, it was some fairly, you know, at the end of the day, you could understandable reasons. First one being everybody increases their repertoire at Christmas, so
Right.
people like to shop everywhere. And you tend to shop places you might not shop for the rest of the year. Like you might go and buy your turkey in a butcher that's local that you only go to once a year, and that's part of Christmas. And you stand in the queue, and they might give you a free mince pie and a glass of sherry, and you talk to people. Or you might go to a farm shop, or you might, upgrade a bit. So you might go to Sainsbury's, or you might go to Marks and Spencers and buy their products and actually what we find is perhaps slightly counterintuitively again, the more financially challenged you are, the more important Christmas is. So
Right.
actually people will prioritize Christmas, they'll save up for it to have a good Christmas.
Which
And
is
to
lovely, isn't it? There's
it
something very
is
it's a beautiful sort of
it's a
thing,
beautiful
that.
thing, yeah, to save money and to try and have a nice Christmas despite everything. So that's an issue, and of course, who's gonna complain when you put Marks and Spencers on the table when you have the family round or your
Right.
neighbours or whatever it might be. So that was an issue, and what it meant was that people who were loyal Aldi shoppers were not shopping at Christmas. What made it worse was when we looked into it, Aldi shoppers, because they tend to be a slightly lower demographic, they actually like Christmas more than the national average. So you've got a
Wow.
bunch of people who shop at Aldi all year who like spending at Christmas, they just don't like spending it at Aldi. So this is a problem for you.
Right.
And then you dig into it a bit more, and what you find is these people like Christmas and they like Christmassiness. So they like carols on loop in the store and hearing Slade. They like the fact that the assistants have hats on. They like the fact there might be a few Mars celebrations on the till. They like the fact that the store dresses up a bit. Guess what? Aldi don't really do any of those things
Right.
because they are hamstrung by their operational model. The more they put complexity into the business, the more they have to charge. So yeah, they do dress the stores a little bit, but it's nothing like you might get in a Tesco or somewhere else. So again, this is a problem for us. So you've got a problem with that, and then the third problem is Aldi has a very limited range. So if you're going to put Christmas lines in, which we do, you have to take things out. It's as simple as that. There isn't room. So you think about all the things like fresh party food, fresh turkeys, all that stuff that goes in. We've got to take stuff out. So there is like a military operation that's
Wow.
so Christmas sort of kicks off start of November and then goes right through obviously to New Year, if you like. Things will come into store. Now, are you broadly speaking? There are two types. There are two sort of mindsets at Christmas, and I'd be interested to know where you fall into this, James. Are you a planner or are you a gambler? So planners will tend to really think through what they buy, when they get paid. They might
Right.
do it across 2 or 3 paychecks to make sure they get the best. Gamblers say, stuff that. you know what? I'll go on Christmas Eve and there'll be something I'll buy. It's turkey, great. If it's not turkey, we'll have beef. And so what? For a planner, that would be like the world's come to an end. There's no
Mm,
sprouts. The world's come to an end. Guess what? Aldi tend to be a bit more plannery. They tend to be
interesting.
people who, well, because again, they're working on maybe more limited budget. So
Yep.
you have to think through what you're doing. We do a special Christmas brochure now. So all of these things then compound because people say, well, as I get near to Christmas and I want to do my Christmas shop, will Aldi have everything? Do they sell those things? And
Mm.
even if they don't sell them, they might have sold out of them. So this is a big
Oh,
problem. So, okay, we've got to do something. So we needed some way of trying to reassure people about all of those things, to showcase the products and to make Aldi seem Christmassy when the stores themselves aren't that Christmassy. So actually,
okay.
again, funny where things come from. We were in some focus groups, listening to people talk, and focus groups have gone, they've gone a bit out of fashion, haven't they?
Mm,
Because people say, well, people don't really talk about what they really do in focus groups. Everything's rationalised. I think, like all things, there's a place for everything, and I
right.
personally, I don't think they're necessarily the best ways to test stuff, but they are good to just listen to people talk about
Yep.
things. And
Yep.
it may not be what they say necessarily, but you might think, oh, the way they were reacting about that, there's something in that. And I remember one lady, I think in Leeds, actually, of all places,
Mm,
said something like, it's funny, isn't it, Christmas, really, because it's just a day. Like, and make all this fuss. And we have a Christmas dinner. It's just a roast dinner, really. But we put silly hats on, and it becomes a bit special. And if you take that thought and extend it a bit further, it's true, isn't it? You put
right.
decorations up in your house, it's still your house, no different. Feels a bit different because you put some sparkly lights on.
Mm,
Think about, your town centre. Maybe there's a Christmas market. Maybe there's,
mm,
it feels a bit different. So we thought this idea of the ordinary becoming a bit more special or becoming a bit more extraordinary at Christmas. We
mm.
thought we like this idea. It's an interesting thought. So that was one sort of thing we were. I always think, James, as well. When we recount all these stories of past glories, shall we say, it all seems so logical, and as I'm sure well it's not logical.
No.
It's a mess,
Mm,
but somehow something crystallizes, doesn't it? And you
right.
think, oh, it sounds so sage-like, doesn't it? And we did this, and we did this. It was so
Yeah, it does.
logical. It's not like that at all. But we did
Yeah.
have it. We had this sort of thought,
Hmm.
and then I was sat with the two creative directors and Darren, who is my colleague, who is the sort of works completely on Aldi in strategy. And it was the year. So the first year of Kevin was 2016, and I think it was the year that John Lewis was doing Monty the Penguin. John Lewis, the undisputed king
Mm,
of, created the whole genre and created this thing in the UK of Christmas being like our sort of Super Bowl, if you like,
mm.
of advertising. And who, just some of the best advertising. The long wait with little boy on the swing, the
Oh, yeah.
snowman, the bear and the hare. All the bear and the hare, all this kind of stuff. So it was the year of Monster Penguin, and we were laughing at the fact that John Lewis were also selling animatronic penguins for like 90 quid. And we're like, oh my God, like 90 quid. And then we just started saying, would it be funny if we had a mascot that was like really cheap? And we said, we had a sprout. And we actually had real sprouts and we wrapped them up and they were our mascot. We were laughing about this. So the creatives took this idea, Clive and Andy, the two creatives, and they said, well, kids don't really like sprouts because they taste funny. But what about carrots? Because what do you do on Christmas Eve? Certainly in the UK, you leave a carrot for
Yep.
Rudolph. You
Yeah,
put
in
a carrot
Australia
for
too.
Rudolph, yeah, a mince pie and a glass of and your dad does it, doesn't he? He
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
in
yeah.
from the
Yeah.
pub, you know. And so so originally we thought this idea of what if
Hmm.
we had originally again a real carrot and wrap them, but then we got this idea of, well, what if the carrot became our sort of mascot? So it sort of crashed into this idea of what if somebody if something was that was ordinary became extraordinary. at Christmas, and bang,
Mm.
the idea was born, and Kevin was born. And we had this idea of this little carrot who would be our Fluent device, our brand mascot, if you like. Um, but also, he would be able to walk around it because carrots are small. He could walk around the Christmas table and he could literally show you all the things that Aldi sell at Christmas. He could walk
Mm.
past the Christmas pudding, he could walk past the mince pies, he could walk past the turkey, etc., etc.
Mm.
So we had this thought, and I never forget, we presented it to the board, Aldi, and the then CEO said to us, "So you're telling me, because bear in mind, it's a hugely important trading period. They take a quarter of all their sales at Christmas.
Wow.
And then also because Q1 is really important for Aldi, because what do we all do in Q1? We want to save money,
Yeah.
want to eat more healthy, we want to lose weight, want to.
Mm.
So the penetration you build at Christmas is key to a good
Mm.
Q1. So you're saying, you're not telling me you want to do this. And we're like, yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, right. So anyway, so bless them, they went with the idea, and what I think was genius was, and was that they. I'm a great believer in the craft of advertising matters. Small details
Mm.
matter. So Dave and Neil and Clive and Andy, the two creators, they worked with PSYOP um, in Los Angeles, who came up with they sort of they gave Kevin his look. They created the whole world,
Mm.
and we got Jim Broadbent to do the VO in this kind of rhyming couplet style.
Mm.
We persuaded Aldi at the last minute to do some toys. We didn't think there'd be a big deal. Anyway, we did it. It was a massive, again, who could, it became a
Right.
massive hit. There was a riot to get the stores. Everybody loved Kevin.
Huh.
And they had a much better Christmas. The trade out was much less. Still was a trade out. It was much less, much less.
Hmm.
The brave thing was that then in year two, Aldi said, "We've not completely convinced us to do that again because supermarkets tend to do something different every other year.
Right.
But why don't you come back to us with Kevin scripts, and why don't you come back to us with non-Kevin scripts?" Which is what we'd still do now every year.
Sure.
And we did them, we developed them, and Kevin won. And we did year two when Kevin got a wife and he got kids. He got
Mm.
Katie and the kid. And from then it snowballed. So we still do the
Mm.
same thing. So then he was, he had Jeopardy with Pascal the Parsnip. He had a duet with Robbie Williams and the Leafy Grinders. He flew Top Gun with Turkey. He was in the Christmas Carrot with Ebanana, and then this year he was Home Alone, who's did a Nike football thing, and it's been phenomenal. What's interesting is we set ourselves then the objective of, what if we could be more famous than John Lewis? What if we could steal their
Mm.
crown? And indeed, for 2 years running, 3 years running now, we've actually beaten them. In fact, we even beat the Coca-Cola
Oh,
truck, which
classic.
is like, people obviously say, it's not till I see the Coca-Cola truck that it's Christmas,
Right.
on System One. So, held up as the most effective Christmas advertising. And what he's allowed us to do, he has brought to Orlando, Orlando's 3S, fame, feeling, and fluency. He's famous.
Mm.
You know who he is. He creates positive emotion. So his strong memory
Mm.
structures, positive emotion, and he comes easily to mind. He quickly is attributable quickly to Aldi, and he's also able to. We've been able to use him across all of our touch points. So
Right.
works really well on social. We even had him doing, cameos this year. Where you can do you can get a celeb to do. We got Kevin. We had dating profiles, all sorts of stuff as well.
Oh,
He's
it's
had
brilliant.
features in the Low magazine. He's had digital out. Toys have gone from strength to strength, which is all
Mm.
just incremental revenue, really. So
Mm.
he's a great example of, you know silliness, I would say. Um, the idea of, don't conflate outputs with outcomes. The
Mm.
outcome is we want to sell more stuff at Christmas, we want to not lose share. How we do it might be a bit silly, and the way we do it. He he's enabled Aldi to expand their range of things at Christmas. Um, we've used him. We even used him during the pandemic in some pandemic advertising, a little cameo
Right.
appearance, which was great. So being consistent, and of course the power of humour
Yeah.
to really um, build positive emotion and also sort of break rigidity of thinking around stuff. Make people think, consider Aldi for Christmas if you like.
There's something I want to touch on. I'm glad you said silliness because it's been one of the things as I've just been over the last few days, watching a lot of the old ads. And there is this distinct feel of like, and on social, it's, whether it's the Aldidas sliders, obviously Kevin, the free Cuthbert thing.
Yeah,
There's, and I wonder, like, we obviously deal with a lot of large consumer brands here in Australia, and I think a lot of them would be cautious about going silly. How do you think about silliness, and how did they think about silliness, and how has that sort of developed over time?
sure. Well, I think that's a very good question, James. So I take it from me, Aldi are not a silly company. They are very serious. They are very serious. They're lovely to work with. They are very. We've worked with them a long time. I like to think that we are growth partners.
Mm,
And we're very honest with each other, which is why I think we've been able to do the things we've been able to do. They are inherently cautious as a
mm,
company, so they're very
mm,
cautious. They don't easily go into things. I think one of the things that I think back to the conversation we were having about digital marketing and selling and ADA, it raises a question, which is what is advertising for?
mm,
And I'm a simple soul. I think it's very simple, really. We need to be noticed, liked, and remembered. So
mm,
first of all, we have to be noticed. You know, the most simple level, advertising has to be, it has to get attention. You have to
mm,
notice it. It then has to tell you something, and it then has to persuade you to believe it in some ways.
mm.
We spend all of our time thinking a lot about the bottom bits. Clients love the bottom bit, don't they? What
Right.
all of our reasons to believe, and also messages
Mm.
telling you something. We don't always think a lot about attention,
Yes.
and if we don't get attention, all is for nothing because you don't pay. You're not even listening to what you're saying to me. It's my belief that one of the best ways to get noticed is to be noticed and liked. If I
Hmm.
liked you, I'm much more likely to pay attention to what you're saying or be more open to and receptive to what you're trying to tell me.
Hmm.
And I think we've always thought that, back to your where you started this quote with Mark Ritson, Aldi stores, they're not dislikable, but they're not easy to like. They're pretty basic. There's nothing particularly, you can get around them pretty quick. But that's probably you know it really. So it was a big part of what we did was to try and make you like us,
Hmm.
and humor and silliness is a really good way to be liked. If you can hit
Right.
which comes back to what I was saying, I think we've got much more in common with Saturday night TV shows like Strictly Come Dancing
Huh.
or the big comedy shows or because and the problem is with those
Mm,
sorts of shows is or sitcoms.
mm,
Think of the classic sitcoms like Dad's Army or
mm,
something. We like them because they feel so familiar to us and they're so easy to like. The the problem is that it's incredibly hard to do. It's like
mm.
writing a pop tune. We've
Right.
got more in common on projects. 5 chords, incredibly hard to do, and because it's easy to be dismissive of it because it's so hard to get the tone right. And that I think has been what we've always aimed for. We've aimed for that kind of mass popularity that comes from a bit of silly, entertaining silliness, if
Mm,
if you like. Um, and what I think what I think is important is it's shown to be one of my as well as leading on retail, I also read on effectiveness. And
mm,
so I'm really interested in effectiveness. I'm really interested in, are we spending clients' money in the right way? Are we getting what we need back from it? And being sort of entertainingly silly is actually hugely effective. If you get it
mm,
right, the payback is enormous. And finding that right tone is tricky, but when you find it, to then it's gold. And if you can nurture it and be consistent around it. What I think is, this is where I think good research, talking to people like Kantar, Millwall Brand, System One, because what they'll give you is the logic to justify the silliness or the magic. The
Right.
silliness, the magic creates hope for the results. You look at the results, you analyze it, you show logically how it's working, and then you get a virtuous circle. And that's what gives companies, I think, confidence. I think the more a company really understands or has a good go at understanding how their advertising works and knows what they are, the more they're likely to be brave. And I don't like that word, but to do that kind of thing, because I mean, brave is a funny word, isn't it?
Mm.
We're being brave in our advertising. Well, what, to have it noticed? Well, yeah, isn't that kind of what it's for? To me, the biggest crime is doing all that work and all that money and nobody cares. Nobody
Right.
notices what you've done. So, and it's being noticed in a positive way. I mean, we can all do shock
Yes.
tactics, we can all do
Sure.
disruptive things, but they're kind of easily forgotten as well. They spike and then they're forgotten. Look at the good example again of recent times, the moldy burger from Burger King.
Mm.
Probably did quite a lot for them short term. Has it done much longer term? Not sure, really.
Mm.
And yet I can quote you ads that made me
Right.
laugh, like the Martians for Cadbury Smash from 50 years ago,
Yep.
because they're still in my mind. I still laugh now when I see that ad. I've seen it a
Mm.
gazillion times.
Mm.
So I think it's and again, it's getting to a point with clients where you can have frank discussions about things like that, but also have some evidence and logical argument to back it up. I think is really
Mm.
important.
Jamie, I could literally sit here all day and chat, but I'm cautious of your time, so I thought maybe we could move into the quick fire questions
Sure.
to wrap up here, and maybe we'll have to have you on for another episode to keep going. There's plenty more to discuss. I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite campaign of all time?
Of all
In
time,
any brand, any era,
gosh, that
your
is a good
personal
question.
personal favorite.
Personal favorite. Well, I am a big fan of I'm a big fan of Heineken. So I know Orlando talks about it, and he quite often shows recently the famous William Wordsworth. I love the Lake District, by the way. So I
Mm,
live not far from the Lake District. So I was there a couple of weekends ago in Ullswater, actually, looking at the
mm,
daffodils. But I just think I love that they're so beautifully made, so funny. The two that always stick in my mind, that one with Wordsworth, and then the skit on My Fair Lady on Pygmalion with the water Mallorca don't taste like what it ought to. It's just so funny
yeah.
and so brilliant. And what I like about it, James, is all lager is refreshing. It's not telling you anything. That's a generic benefit of
Right.
lager. It's refreshing. Well, yeah, but the way they took that ad and exaggerated it in such a way, it's just so funny and clever. I think that's great work. I think Cadbury have done some great
Mm,
work. I mean, I can think all the way back to Cadbury's cream eggs. How do you eat yours? Mr. Cadbury's parrot
right.
for mini eggs. The recent work they did on There's a Glass and a Half, and everyone, of course, very award winning. I think
Mm,
that is superb. Also, all that I'm a great believer that if you can sing it still. You still
right.
remember it. So for Mash Get Smash, or it's all Cadbury stuff, isn't it? Finger of Fudge, all those kind of things. Those are the kind of ads that appeal to me, really.
Mm,
And they're very much. I mean, they're very. I always think advertising is a great. Does it lead? Does it reflect? It's a great. If you look back through the history of advertising, it's a great mirror, maybe, on
mm,
society and culture, isn't it? Because quite often it was reflecting the sort
right.
of the cultural norms of the time, if you
Mm.
like.
And I think, funnily enough, the water in Majorca, I think there's a parallel to like brands there as well. There's sort of, whether it's that sort of that regional, playing on the regional accents
Yeah.
and all that. That's brilliant. So maybe putting aside some of the mega brands, the Apples, I'd love to get your take on sort of up and coming brands that are doing, who's doing branding really, really well that isn't maybe leaning on an established, decades of brand? Someone new, up and coming, that you think is doing it particularly well?
Yeah, I mean, well, not so up and coming. Probably up and come, but I think Specsavers with the work
Mm,
they did with, should have gone to Specsavers
brilliant.
again. A totally generic, a totally generic claim. You need glasses. It's a kind of,
Mm.
I love that. There's an old adage, isn't there? Advertising strategy on one page. Have you got something to say? Say it. Have you not got something to say? Well, make something up. It's it's kind of that's it really. Job done. And they took a totally generic thing and they flipped it into something they could own.
Mm.
I was reading. I don't know if you read any of the work of Bob Hoffman, that contrarian. Really
No.
worth reading his blogs. But he says, the greatest positioning for your brand is a good creative idea. Have a good creative
Mm,
idea. We torture ourselves around brand
right.
meaning and things, but somehow having a great creative idea is a far more interesting thing. It's interesting a lot. I think a lot of the very upcoming tech brands ads tend to be a bit generic. I think they're not
Mm,
always great because they tend to. I was talking to somebody. I'm not going to get into Apple, but we were talking about the great days of Apple advertising, Apple iPhone. They were product demo ads really because it was
right.
the
That's interesting.
functionality of the functionality of the product was
Mm,
such that in itself, from great functions
mm,
can something new come. Um, but I think there's been some quite fun stuff in some of the things like the sort of the some of the aggregators like again the
mm,
Meerkat. I mean that's not new really, but I mean that's
mm,
been around for probably 10 years or more.
mm,
But the idea of just getting the word Meerkat into your mind so
right.
that for the compare the market, so it drives you to the website. I think it's very is interesting.
Mm,
Interesting.
that is interesting. We've talked a little bit about today about some of the negative trends in advertising, but what do you think is the most overrated trend in marketing and advertising right now?
I'll give you two. Purpose, for sure.
Interesting.
I think I don't know whether you've read or any of your listeners have read the book, Steve Harrison's book, Can't Sell, Won't Sell. Worth a read. Whether you agree with him or disagree with him, it's how advertising trying to sell things and starts to try and save the world. Builds very much on the work of Andrew Tenzer, which is really predicated on the idea that fundamentally people who work in marketing and normal people have very different values. People
Right.
who work in advertising tend to be motivated by success, by power, by status, by
Hmm.
money. Most people don't. Most people,
Right.
it's more about community, family,
Hmm.
belonging. And so you have a disparity straight away. And then this idea that brands can bolt on things to
Right.
their brand that are at best uh, you know sort of like slightly spurious and at worst completely nothing to do with them. That's not to say, as I've said, if it is true to what you are,
Yeah.
then that's a different thing. That's a brand truth. I saw some great work that Lifebuoy soap did in
Mm.
India. Well, so Lifebuoy antibacterial soap was about body odor, wasn't it? You wash yourself in Lifebuoy soap. It's a way of staying fresh. They did a whole campaign about washing your hands, and it's number of children that die from diarrhea and from hand to mouth and dehydration. That's hugely relevant because that's a truth
Mm.
of what their brand is. And I,
Yeah.
and I get that at all. That's not trying to bolt something onto a brand that isn't true. That's very different from having a motel brand that's saving the gorillas or something. It's just kind of crazy.
There's
Um,
something about authenticity there, isn't there?
yeah,
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 and I mean, I
absolutely.
think your example of how Aldi lives that purpose with, like you say,
Yeah.
it's often that slightly lower socioeconomic demographic. I think that's brilliant. There's a brand I just want to tell you about. There's an Australian brand called Who Gives a Crap, which make toilet
Yes.
paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can't remember the specifics. I'm hoping to have Simon, the CEO, and I think they put 10% of profits go to building toilets in developing countries, and
Yeah,
that for me just feels like that's such a brilliant. It's in a way it links a few things of what you said. It's clearly a brilliant purpose. It's also a creative idea, right? Like it's a sort of there's something very
yeah,
and obviously the name is just absolutely brilliant.
brilliant, brilliant, absolutely, yeah.
There's something there.
My other overrated one is the good old metaverse. So, boy,
Oh,
if I need to have, you know what? I've had enough conversations about the metaverse to last me a lifetime.
fascinating.
Yeah, we won't get into. We probably won't get it. Let's not get into the metaverse. But I think there's a lot of the Mark Ritson. I'm a big fan of Mark. Also, I mean, who wouldn't be for all of his colourful language, which is
Yeah,
his brand. He's great though. He's
yeah,
great,
he is.
and he says one of the problems we have is we're so obsessed with the new in advertising. The new and the novel is so important that you always feel like you've got something new to say. And he says, I often feel like I can't come on and say, well, what you should be really doing is all the things that people have been doing for the last 100 years, because it's
100%.
not, who wants to hear that? And that's the problem. In the search for the new, we've over prioritized sometimes the novel and the sort of shiny and the disruptive, without thinking about things that most people don't want to be disrupted in that way. It's
Right.
evolution of things, or it's one of the things Orlando talks about is keep things 80% fresh, give it a fresh. Things we know with a fresh twist are very appealing,
Yeah,
and so
I'm wondering if Aldi coins or Aldi NFTs have come up in the last few years. I know you won't say, but I'm sure you've sat um, in those meetings. Now that's fascinating. I think and AI is clearly the
yes,
that's
that's the new. Although my husband John is he used to be an IT teacher actually, and now does work in IT education. He's originally did computer. He's a computer scientist by background. He says to me all the time, "There's no such thing as IT. There's machine learning, but there's no such thing as IT. I'm sorry, no such thing as AI. I mean, so there's no such thing as AI. There's machine learning. And he says, the Turing test. Nothing would pass the Turing test. Nothing. You couldn't sit and have a conversation with any system and be fooled into thinking it was a human being. What we're getting is increasingly better machine learning,
sure.
where things are learning. Chat GPT, they're learning to do things that we did. But it's not. It isn't truly AI. So
And speaking to a lot of brands every day and every week. I mean, and look, even if it is, there's something to be said for the fundamentals, and if brands maybe put more effort into all the things we've talked about today, I think
yeah.
they'd probably be in a better place.
Yeah,
So
I want to just say at the end. So I thought of another one. If you followed, is it Sam Adams beer? Your cousin from Boston. I love those ads. They're fantastic, fantastic, great stories. They're funny. He's a great character. The one they did with the robot, the dancing robots.
oh yeah.
Fantastic. Again, I could watch that ad time and time again. Some of the recent McDonald's work, the McDonald's,
Oh,
the fancy McDonald's, brilliant.
yeah, that was really, really clever. It reminds me, I recorded an episode with a lady called Melissa Rosenthal. She was the chief creative officer at BuzzFeed for many years, and she sort of built that whole branded content business. She's now at funnily enough, she's at a software company now called ClickUp, and she said something which is if you sort of can you really. It goes back to what you were talking about with just making people laugh, and so they've made all of these funny skits, which is it's very unusual for the B2B
Yeah.
world, which is brilliant. So let's take the flip side. So, what's the trend that no one is talking about that we probably should be talking about? What's the sort of is there a hidden
Well, I think
gem?
I think entertainment is interesting. I think we're seeing a blurring. I mean, it's a kind of old trend come back, isn't it? I mean, where did these things start with soap operas and
Right.
but I think the blurring of advertising into entertainment is interesting. I think where content. What we've all realised is guess what? If you make, content's such a terrible word, isn't it? And
I
that's
know.
another one. It sounds like filler, doesn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
we'll just shove something in there. It's like what you're going to stuff the mattress with. Content, it's awful.
Yeah.
But if you think, what we've realized is, guess what? If you create stuff that people like, they're more likely to pay attention to it. So I've sat in endless presentations recently where people have talked about TikTok being like, a lean
Mm.
in medium. Well, no kidding. Because guess what? It's quite entertaining. So
Yeah.
if you're bored on the train or sat at an airport, as I often am, I'm sure, and you sort of think, oh, I'll have a bit of a scroll through TikTok, before you know where you are, you're sucked into the thing because
Yeah.
it's an entertainment channel, really,
Mm.
unlike ads that are, maybe pre-rolls or whatever on YouTube, which are annoying and
Mm.
are interrupting you all the time. So I think that crossover into entertainment, I think
Yeah.
is an interesting one. And I say it
Yeah.
goes right back to, the idea of where advertising came from, and the idea that, if you're gonna interrupt people's lives, be be at least you can do is reward them with a laugh or something, or tell
Mm.
them something useful. So I think that is a very interesting space, and I
Yeah.
think we'll see more going on there as time goes on, and how that how that then we've rediscovered things, haven't we? I mean, so we're rediscovering
Mm.
that. We're rediscovering, integration as it's called now. But the idea was that if you that marketing is more than advertising, and
Right.
all of those different things, if you can make them much more holistic to an idea and work together, Disney, of course, are the geniuses at all
Mm.
of this, and isn't it interesting how they're blurring the lines of entertainment and
Right.
it's very interesting. So I think that's a big trend.
Mm.
I think humor is the other
Mm.
one. I think humor is on the way back. It's had a terrible time.
Interesting. Why is
Uh,
that? That's interesting to me. Why is that?
why is it coming back? I,
No, or
I think.
why did it ever go away? I
Well,
mean,
I think it was two things. I think it it first of all, I think the rise of digital advertising and this rise of
mm,
selling
right.
um, sort of put the kind of was a negative effect. The famous quote isn't it by David Ogilvy, and I'm going to misquote it, but it's like nobody ever bought from a clown or something. It was like that. Ogilvy liked all
Right.
his long copy, so I think there was a very much.
Huh.
I mean, which is that's totally not, because if you look at loads of his great ads, they're very funny. So
Mm.
advertisers said a lot of things that they didn't necessarily do in reality. They like to make out that everything they did was very scientific and logical, when actually a lot of it was very silly. The famous
Mm.
one with Ogilvy, of course, is the Hathaway shirt man. The guy with
Right.
the eye patch on. Do you know the story of that? He was going to the shoot for the shirts, and he walked past a joke shop, and there was a it was Halloween or something, and there was a eye patch in the window, and he bought it. And when he got there, he said, "Oh, put it on." It just made him look more interesting. Looked a bit raffish, didn't he? A bit rakish and a bit sort of, "Ooh, wonder
That's
why he's only got."
fascinating.
He looks a bit like Errol Flynn.
Right.
So made it more interesting. So I think that's why. So I think the more we moved into serious selling, the more
Mm.
the humor, and I think also the rise of the rise of, but the rise. If it doesn't sound like a contradiction, the rise of the weakening role of the CMO happened. I think as CMOs became, as finance became more important,
Mm.
and you had to justify things in those boardrooms, very left brain, or then
Mm.
humor didn't seem so relevant all of a sudden.
No.
I think what's happening is now is there's a lot of evidence that's made people realize, and so hopefully, and I think also the times we live in, which are challenging for all sorts of reasons, we
Mm.
all need a bit of a laugh.
Yeah.
Like having a
Yeah.
bit of putting a smile on somebody's face, even just for a few moments, is a
Mm.
is a good thing to do. And I think brands that get that balance right are
Mm.
brands that will do very well. But it's very hard to do. It's very hard to get the humor right. It's a
Mm.
real thing. So I think that's something that's on the way back
Yeah,
as well.
I think that's a great insight, and I'm sure you followed these Oatly spam, that Oatly spam campaign that was big a
Yeah,
couple of weeks ago. I mean, it was funny. I was talking to a friend about those billboards, and he works in advertising, and he said, like really, like if you can, he said exactly what you said. If you can make someone smile, that's half the battle. And I mean, their copywriting. I mean, whatever you think about the product or whatever, but their
yeah.
copywriting is just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
one that I loved was, I don't know if you saw it. I think it was in Manhattan. It was a billboard, and the copy was something like, I'll butcher it now, but it was like, what would be sillier than buying a billboard in Times Square to promote a newsletter, and there's a second billboard, buying a
Yeah,
second one. It's just bloody brilliant.
it's
I
just
mean,
funny. Just
it's
you walk
just
past
funny.
that and it just makes you laugh
Yeah.
as you trudge to work in the morning or whatever. It's great, and I think hopefully we're rediscovering. These things have all come round full circle, but we're rediscovering the power of that. And I say the third one, so I'm not keep going. Is I think hopefully a rediscovery of craft as well,
Mm,
a rediscovery of the importance of craft in advertising. Great writing,
mm,
great art direction, putting in. I mean, they've coined a term now. So the Easter egg is a term, isn't it? Putting things in ads for people
mm.
to discover and like. I mean, I always
Oh,
think, the masters of that are people like Pixar. When you
mm.
watch their movies, they operate at so many levels. You can watch them with the kids or
Yep.
whatever, and then you're laughing at that little. Or so I've never actually noticed that thing on the wall behind there.
Mm,
That's just, I love it, and I think it's
right.
there's a great adage: if you treat your audience with respect, they will
Mm,
respect you. So put them give them space and allow them to come to the thing as well. Don't try and sell all the time, which is of course the great temptation. And I think so it's often the great temptation when times are hard and budgets are strapped, because we have this term, don't we, hard working. It's got to be
right.
hard working. Well, actually, what do we mean by hard working? What an outcome, don't we?
Mm.
The outcome might not necessarily be the output, but
Yeah, that's brilliant. Last question, Jamie. Who should I have on the show next? Who should I talk to for?
well, Orlando, if you could get hold of Orlando, he would be a great person to have
Mm,
on. I'm a big admirer of Paul Feldwick. So if you
mm,
know Paul, who wrote, advertising for the history of the anatomy of humbug, I should say,
mm.
and why does the peddler sing? Rory is very good as
Yeah,
well.
of course.
Would be great. Obviously, Mark Ritson would be great. I heard an interview with the lady from Sam Adams. She was
Mm,
great. The marketing director. I think she's the CMO there.
great.
John Evans from System One
Yeah,
is very very good as well. Um, yeah, any of those
brilliant.
people.
Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was such a fascinating chat. I mean, even just the Aldi war stories are just brilliant. Like I said, I could talk all day. So I think we've got plenty more to talk about. So we'll have to do it again sometime soon.
It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks for listening to the Own the Moment podcast. If you liked this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss upcoming episodes. And to suggest a guest or provide feedback, please visit our dedicated podcast hub at ownthemomentpod.com.